Welcome to another edition of the ADAMA Arts Salon. We are happy to join you once again with another engaging conversation. We're here with the one and only Ruth Carter this morning. It's great to see you.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So yeah, let's kind of jump right into it. It seems we kind of got started a little bit just in the background. Yeah, so first of all, oh wait, here's Dr. Dunn. She's coming in. Hey, Stephanie.
Hi. Oh, hey.
All right, I'm going to disappear here and I'll let you guys take it from here.
Oh my gosh.
Hi, Dr. Dunn.
It's Stephanie, and I'm just going to refer to you as the fabulous Miss Ruth Carter because I'm sorry.
It's Ruth. Now we got that out of the way.
But I am so honored to be having this discussion with you today. I have followed your career. I have loved your work for so long. And you may not remember this, but we've met before because I was able to come down when you were doing Roots.
Wow.
And, yes, ma'am. And we were able to visit your studio.
Nice.
Where we had this huge production going on, and it was just
amazing. That was such a beautiful studio. Oh, I just love that place down in New Orleans.
Yes, ma'am. And it was quite impressive. And I'm going to come back to Root soon because there's something that you were explaining to us about your aesthetic for that project that was really fabulous. And so I'm gonna circle back, but I just want to start maybe with just talking about, because pressing minds really want to know, and believe it or not, people were kind of emailing and texting, ask her this and ask. So I said, I'm gonna try to get in a little bit of that for curious minds. But as I was thinking about your work and trying to put, and we're talking about almost some 70 credits. It's just an incredible. Can you even believe that?
I can't. I go, wow, where did time go? I mean, I just kept, doing what I loved, and the years just passed. The projects kept coming. I had wonderful people that believed in me, like Spike and Robert Townsend and Keenan Ivory Wayans. And then, after getting a nomination for Malcolm X, I was relied upon to be the person who would delve into research and really give a project an authentic look and feel. So I've been blessed.
I want to talk more about that because I was asking myself all week, what is the Ruth Carter aesthetic? I mean, every artist, and you are an artist, you are a storyteller, artist. And a lot of times, I don't think people make the jump. People who are not in the business, I'm saying, people who are not artists even in that way, don't necessarily think of costume designers.
Yes.
For film, when they're thinking of artists, because they're thinking painting, they're thinking photography.
Yes. Yeah, art is, art transcends all sorts of mediums, all sorts of things. And I think that we all have within us, this artistic touch that we can bring to things. It's surprising, it can be surprising. But as far as costume design is, we're part of the filmmakers, we're part of the collaborators, we are part of, what makes you transform into a character. We're also the part that's seen on camera, in every frame there is a costume. And so it's integral that I join my fellow artists, the cinematographers, the production design, the actors, the director, the production. Everything has to have a synergy. So I have to approach my work from an artistic point of view. Otherwise, things don't connect.
So let's dig into that a little bit more, because with the projects you've done, and I want to just point out some of them, because what's fascinating is you are obviously very distinguished for period pieces, but you've done biopics. It's this amazing catalog of the fantastical and the others that you've had chance to do. And what you just said about the interpretation and the authenticity, I want to think out loud in the collaboration a little bit more about those things. For example, collaborating. And of course, famously, it started with one Spike Lee, with School Days, and you obviously have to work very closely with directors, because on the one hand, you are bringing to life the scripts, the story, their vision. So how do you kind of navigate that? Because you're also innovating. Can you kind of?
Yeah, it's really wonderful when you sit down with a director and he really wants to know what your ideas are. And, you know, that's how it starts. When you read that script, immediately, you know, visions come to your mind about what you'd like to do with a scene or character, or how you see it colored, or how, you know, it's just like reading a really good book. You can imagine what things are just from the words that are on the page. And so a really good script and a really good director will sit down and say, what are your ideas? So you come to the table and you bring ideas, and they tell you if they've written the script themselves. Like many times Spike was the writer and the director. You know, he would give you little things that he had envisioned and when he wrote the script that he'd like for you to include in your work. But the ones I really trust, that they brought another artist to the table as a costume designer, they really want to hear what you have in mind. And that also helps them direct you if you're a little bit, you know, being a little avant-garde, and then the script doesn't really call for it to be that broad. They will rein you in and say, well, maybe not for this character, maybe for that one. So there's a conversation that happens first, and you share ideas, and then you collaborate with the production designer, and things just start to blossom. I mean, the research really does come in a very important aspect of everything, because when you rely on what you learn, you know, I know for Roots, I learned how fabrics were coming from Europe, and a plantation owner would buy, you know, a whole lot of one style of fabric, just lots and lots of it. And they had these cabins on the plantation that were specifically for clothing the slaves. And so, you know, one piece of fabric would clothe many, many slaves, and thus you'd see the same stripe on, you know, many people, and it would almost identify them as being a part of that plantation. And so when I read that, I thought, well, that's why you see so much gingham sometimes, or so much stripes sometimes in one etching or one photograph. And so I tried that, and it really felt so authentic and real. And so that's kind of where we meld, you know, ideas and research and collaboration with the director. That's how it kind of all comes to fruition.
Wow. So let's talk a little bit more about that now. So there's that director's relationship. And I imagine too, that what happens once you work with someone, as you have, you know, with Spike Lee, School Days, and Do the Right Thing, and Malcolm X, and I believe Clockers, there's a whole body of work and a whole story in that. You develop sort of a shorthand, don't you? I mean, there's the trust is sort of really kind of organic.
But you don't really want to rely too much on the shorthand. What you develop is, you know, what's important to them. You know exactly when to give them, you know, feed them more information about what you're doing. You kind of understand, you know, what parts are really important to them, and you make sure that they're involved in those parts. So I guess that could be considered a shorthand, but it's not a shorthand where you just go off on your own island and do your own thing. You know, I always say I don't want to be alone in this journey. I really do want to collaborate.
And that's what film is. I mean, film, you know, the storytelling in film is always a collaboration. No one does it, no matter how much of an auteur, right, a director is, it is
Yeah.
reliant
Yeah,
on,
for
right,
sure.
writers and so forth and so forth. I wonder too how this though kind of corresponds to working with actors, and it's
Mhm.
extraordinary to me. I was thinking about all of the actors that you've worked with, and
Mhm.
you've worked with some more than once. Even Oprah now you've worked with at least twice, with the
Yes.
Butler,
Mhm.
and then with Salma. But
Yeah.
somebody like Eddie Murphy, for example, who you've done
Yes.
Doolittle with, and you've done
Yeah.
Daddy Daycare with him, and you did the wonderful Dolomite Is My Name. And the same is true, obviously Angela Bassett, you've worked
Yes.
now with several times. How does that, because are there times when what you have envisioned, do you ever have to sort of then revise, should I say that? Because the actress who is also interpreting, or the actor, do you know what I mean? That in the costume is so important to their role. How does that work out in that sort of working together?
Yes. Well, you always want to present something. You do want to have a point of view. So even though that point of view may change, you do want to, when the actor or the actress comes into your fitting room, you want to be able to present to them, the research you have done, this illustrations that you have done for the character, because sometimes that helps them too. They may have been on another film before they came to you, and they really may not have had enough time with the character. So this is a really precious time for them to actually, start really thinking deeply about what it is that this character would look like. And so even if it shifts, we have a starting point, and they really do rely on you to sometimes present them with your research. Many times I've had actors ask for information that I have gathered that they could take away with them to start their journey in researching. So, we do sometimes get into the room and start making decisions. We start talking about the character. We start understanding the color palette. We start trying on clothes, trying on garments, and when you get something that really feels right, it really feels right, and you both start to build from there. With Eddie Murphy, I remember on Dolomite Is My Name, we are the same age, and we both remembered the early 70s. We were young teenagers, and we would remember every name of every kind of garment, like, matador pants and marshmallow shoes and knickknacks. And so we had a real fun time kind of going down memory lane. And at the same time, we could actually envision this character because we'd seen this character. I mean, Dolomite was a real person, but we remembered those times, and it was fun to identify all of the different aspects of the things that he wore. With Angela Bassett on How Stella Got Her Groove Back, she had over 60 changes in that film. And we went on this journey together because we also both knew her. We were both like professional women. We'd both been to Jamaica on vacation. And so we really could personalize that journey and imagine what it would have been like for Stella. So, it's a wonderful journey of discovery and transformation.
I love something you just said about working with Angela Bassett, because that's also something that I considered a throughway through your work, is the way that you empower women in your costume design. And I'm saying this before we get to Black Panther, which of course it was magnificently displayed, but but your journey doing that started so much earlier. We could look at What's Love Got to Do with It, which may have been the first film with Angela Bassett, or one of the sort of starring her as lead, maybe because you had done Malcolm X with her, I know.
Yes, I
So
had
can
done
you talk
Malcolm
about
X.
that kind of wanting your wardrobe, what you
Yes.
create, to really empower, no matter what the role is in terms of women, because I see that throughout your work.
Thank you. Well, I've been very fortunate to, portray, to, lend my artistry to wonderful subjects and stories. Tina Turner was an icon, and, I was fortunate enough to, be able to go into her archive, into her storage, and look at all of her beautiful stage costumes, and really kind of feel the sense of someone who had dedicated their life to this, profession, and that had risen to, the top of their game. So it was a wonderful a journey to kind of unpack it and go all the way back to Nutbush and to imagine what that would be like. And I remember the day that Tina Turner came to set, and we were like 2 weeks away from finishing. We had already shot 10 weeks of film, and maybe the story was a little painful for her to come and be there for the whole journey. So she was there the last 2 weeks, and I just was in awe, and she was really generous, and we worked on things together. And I'll never forget opening Angela Bassett's dressing room and seeing Tina Turner sitting in there with Angela Bassett, plaiting her hair, cornrowing her hair to put her wig on. And Angela was sitting on the floor cross-legged, and Tina was on the couch. And that was before camera phones, but I certainly wish I had one at that point. It's just now, it's a precious memory.
Wow, that is so incredible. What about that when you now get to Black Panther? Because I really think that your whole career, that was one of the culminating moments, but it was something that you had already been working with, the African tradition, the African diasporic traditions and rituals, and it sort of all, to me, comes together in this kind of magnificent way in Black Panther. Can you kind of talk about the aesthetic, the thinking about African traditional culture with Afrofuturism and how that kind of...
Right. Well, I feel like I was groomed for Black Panther my whole entire life. Maybe I was groomed to be a costume designer and to tell these stories like Malcolm X and Amistad. But, I grew up, there was my family, and there was also my extended family. And we all believed in the African diaspora. I learned Kiswahili as a child. I knew about the Nation of Islam and all of the edicts of, just empowering the Black community and showing us in our true light, and really, educating each other and being responsible, collective work and responsibility. So, from a child, I was, that was kind of ingrained in me to be the best that I could be as a Black woman, and also, show each other, show our culture in the best light, not something that was made up and incorrect, but infuse the African culture into our aesthetic, because it's already there. So to display it is kind of, the way you show the world, who we are. And I've always felt that uplifting the race was a part of my my plan and my purpose. And so when I go through a film like Amistad, and the Africans come to this country and take over a ship, and they're trying to guide that ship back to Africa, the question is, what do they look like? Well, they don't look like savages, because they came from a country, and I understood and I researched where they came from, where they were kings, and they were living their lives and doing all the things that people do in trading and all of those things. So I knew about their religions too. They were Muslim. So I decided that I would honor their origin and give them the traditional things that they would do, to give them a backstory. And so that lended itself in every single project that I've ever done. Just, always look at the truth in the backstory, give it its, its place, and don't make it up. So with Black Panther, when I went into Marvel for my interview with Ryan Coogler, you know, Marvel's like the CIA, you know, doors
Yes, it
doors
is.
like slam behind you
Yes, indeed.
mysteriously when you walk in the corridors. But seriously, Ryan sat in front of me and I was very nervous, and he's just such a calm soul. And he looked at me and he said, Ruth, you know, I remember Malcolm X, and I went to see it when I was a little boy with my dad. And I remember I was sitting on his lap and I liked the costumes even then. And
Wow.
I just felt like I had done my job. You know, I felt like, you know, he was giving me a story about, you know, his origins and, you know, his consciousness and, you know, his father, you know, teaching his son, you know, about, you know, this national leader of the Nation of Islam. And I was also a part of enriching him by doing Malcolm X, and that he remembered that, told me that, you know, I was doing the right thing, and maybe auditioning for Black Panther when he was a little boy. You know, I just feel very spiritual about things like that. And so yes, Black Panther was like, I feel like the culmination of everything that I had done in my career, but also everything who I was or am as a person.
Wow, I love that. I know that you've talked about how you guys sort of created this Wakandan Bible, right?
Yes.
And you were thinking about real African tribes and the cultures they were based on. You talked about the Dogon of Mali, the Jabari
Yes.
tribe, the
Yes.
Merchant tribe. You talked
Yes.
about the women of South Africa,
Yes.
and you know the headpieces.
Yes.
And I know that you worked with your one of your collaborators for the jewelry. In fact, was an LA jewelry designer, correct? And you guys thought a lot
Yeah,
about
Dorian Fletcher.
yes. But can you think? I like what you said about the way that the Eurocentric view of African art and African peoples with
Yes.
this sort of colonizing primitive terminology, and
Right.
that Black Panther perhaps helped to really revise that, right? And to expand sort of globally what the truth of the
Yes.
richness of it. Can you talk more about that?
Well, because Black Panther was a view of Africa before colonization, I was very sure that there were things that I did not want to include. And one of them was not too much waxcloth, because that came over from the Dutch. I did include the Lesotho blankets, because that wasn't something that was colonized, and it was given to the community, the Basotho community, as a gift. And so I was very clear that I didn't want a broad generalization of Africa. I wanted to go very specifically into the tribes and really understand the regions and what made them special and what made their artistry so special. And even if I combine aesthetics like I did with the Dora, the aesthetic of the beadwork is something that transcends all of the tribes of Africa and has a significance to mean certain things. So the harness that the Dora Milaje wear, as you can see, it travels around their body and it has a beaded tabard down the front. I really wanted to bring to that a sense of honor, and something that you would, you know, feel connected to because it had such a historical significance. Maybe this harness could be something that would be passed down to, you know, a young Dora, a daughter, a granddaughter, like that. So, you know, being able to contextualize the costumes, And we did have this Wakandan Bible that helped us along the way, because there was not a lot of time to put Black Panther together. If I was researching Africa, like some people think I went to Africa to do all that research, I'd still be there right now. So it was nice to see that Hannah Beekler and Ryan Coogler had really dove deep into, what tribes we were going to be influenced by and inspired by. And so just delving into those avenues was an exploration like you wouldn't believe through the research, because these were the ancient indigenous tribes. And so when you understand, the shea butter mixed with the clay soil that the Himba women put all over their face, their skin, their hair, and it was a form of beauty for them, we realized that we could redirect and present these images of beauty and show them in their glorious way by using some of the same techniques, some of the same colors, some of the same things. So at the Warrior Falls, we were able to show tradition. Here you see the oh, you have a really good slideshow here. Here you see the Dora, and they're really heavily based on the Himba, with the stretched calf skin, with their back skirts, the leather harnesses. And then we used a little scarification by designing their chest piece, arm pieces, to have these raised, bumpy aspects of them, so it would feel like scarification. And these are forms of beauty. And I don't think that we ever really had an opportunity to honor that and to show that in a beautiful way. We've only been shown and told that, it meant something very negative. The armor pieces, the neck rings, we wanted that to look like jewelry. So we silver plated and gold plated and made them really brilliant and beautiful. And the neck piece and the armor pieces the prototype was designed by Dorian, and then we made molds from it. And I really wanted Dorian's aesthetic in this, because her aesthetic is very hand twisted and hammered, and that too is seen so much in a lot of the vintage African jewelry pieces.
And that also speaks to what you were saying about as a costume designer who is managing, right?
Yes.
A film. It
Yes.
doesn't mean literally that you're sitting down with sketchpad, and I'm just trying to sort of lift that for people who we really don't know. We just accept what ends up on screen, and we love it. We love the Black Panther look. We appreciate it. But the work, from the research to all of this thoughtful, detailed collaboration with Hannah, who production design, your fellow Academy Award winner for production design on that. And DeLorean, working with a whole team, managing a whole team is part of, the challenge, I imagine, but also the joy of working on a film, no matter how small or large scale as that. But that's part of it. You have to have extremely, I think, extraordinary management skills, the ability to really work with people, to recognize talent, to bring in the right people, right?
Yes, and also to, find the talent and the aesthetic that works for the idea that you're trying to put forth. So
do you always start with that? So is this obviously there's the story, there's the script, there's the story, but for you, and I'm thinking about Roots and what you said once about Roots, and you talked about how for you wanted to approach it, and you were thinking about indigo and blue. It was a fascinating conversation, because it's so different visually from the original Roots, isn't it?
Yes, yes, and indigo was harvested not only in Africa, but also, in the plantations. And so this blue cloth, this blue dye, is something that would be prevalent. And most of the images that we see of, slave times in Africa and in this country, it's just muddy. It's just one color. when they were doing vegetable dyeing and all that kind of stuff. So I really just wanted to make that connection from indigo in Africa to indigo in America as being a color and a through line for them, something that they related to.
So I think that really suggests how you are lifting history and you're bringing it into whatever contemporary story you're telling. But you are a historian in a sense, because obviously, as you said, it starts with research, and people thought you had gone to Africa, because, of the detail and the thoughtfulness. How do you call that together for a project? Because Roots was also that was a huge project. It was the mini series on A&E Networks, huge project. Black Panther, huge project for a motion picture. So you can't get on the plane necessarily and and visit all these places. So what is your starting point? Are you in archives online? Kind of take us through what a working high level costume designer, what that process really looks like. Because I think it's very mysterious for those of us who don't do this.
Yeah, well, writers, in order to tell a compelling story, they have to write, a beginning, an arc, a middle, an end. And so when I go on that journey of reading that script, I can actually break that script up, just as the writer might have done, to tell the story. I'm thinking visually, how will I tell the story if I break it up in the same way? How does this story begin? What colors do I use in the beginning? How do I tell this story with clothing? What historically was worn during this time, and how does it fit into the journey that we're going to go on? So I do break everything down. I also break the research down, and I decide what parts of the research would be beneficial. And sometimes there's like a spark in the story where something, happens, and I want to bring all the elements of the story together. And how do I do that? Usually the first thing I think of is I think in terms of color, and then I think in terms of facts. And what are the facts of the times? The 60s had a different look than the 80s, just color, visuals, shapes, silhouettes. So I make sure my brain and my thoughts are, clear about what time we're in and what does this story require. Is it a dark story? Is it a vibrant story? Is it sad? Is it, is it very washed out? So, and then I have these conversations with the production designer about what the set's going to look like, what colors are going to be on the different sets. So I make sure that, we're not clashing, that I'm enhancing their work, they're enhancing my work. And sometimes we don't always know all of the answers in the beginning. So you just kind of go on the journey and you start laying things out in the way that you see it. And when you share your ideas, sometimes it sparks ideas for other people too. Maybe they haven't gotten to that point in the script yet, but they see what wonderful ideas you have for that scene, and they start thinking in terms of how to enhance some of the things that you're doing with their work. Maybe the lighting designer wants to do something really moody, and the contrast in the clothes is very important to show how the lighting effects are going to all kind of work and tell this very exciting story. And so I make sure that things are connecting, and the only way that I can connect is to have the knowledge, and the knowledge starts in the beginning. What is the time period? What were the colors of the time? What were the silhouettes of the time? And I take that knowledge and I just expound upon it and I share it.
So talk to us a little bit. I love the color, because certainly you can't look at your work. That's one of the outstanding things. All these years later, the one thing that I remember most, other than the fabulous scenes, Fiddler's costume, and just standing near that, was just that discussion that you did about indigo. And so I have here School Days, for example.
Yes.
So if I am talking about color with School Days, immediately red.
Yeah.
Red is the color that jumps out a lot. And right. You said about School Days and about Do the Right Thing, that a lot of your the things you thought about in terms of fashion were Nike and you know, sort of, you know, hip hop culture. Can you talk a little bit, if you can travel back with us a little bit,
Yeah, sure.
to school
Well,
days?
you know, School Days was my first film, and but I had done theater and stuff like that beforehand, so I knew how to, you know, kind of approach it. But Spike was very much into, you know, his sports, and so a lot of things were kind of inspired by, you know, the love of sports. These are hockey jerseys that the girls are wearing that we had custom made, and we put the J, a small J for Jigaboo, and a capital W for wannabes, and they're wearing jazz boots. So a lot of the colors were sporty colors, you know, and you know, for this scene, because it was a musical number, you know, we really wanted it to, you know, be vibrant. And you know, Spike, people don't know that Spike really loves musicals, and this was, you know, his way of, you know, infusing a musical into School Days. Also with Do the Right Thing, we did a lot of saturated colors. It was supposed to be the hottest day in the summer. You know, it all took place on one day. And, you know, Spike always, you know, would say, you know, in New York, on the hottest day, or any other city in America, you know, a lot of things, you know, jump off, you know, because people are hot. And we didn't have, you know, a huge budget. So we had to rely on a lot of product placement, and Nike was a big supporter of Do the Right Thing. So I had to, you know, lots of compression shorts and tennis shoes and all kinds of stuff. Aqua socks. I remember, you know, having tons of those for the water scene where they open up the hydrant. And so I infused that, and I often thought, how am I going to use, you know, this athletic apparel, this Nike stuff, which is bright, 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 and it's made out of this fabric that's not necessarily easy to, you know, tone down. So and we knew that Brooklyn was a cultural hub of New York, and, you know, it's not uncommon to see a lot of cultural garb, you know, on the streets, and it's also very vibrant and saturated. So
Orange, yellows.
yes,
Right.
so we infused the African cloth in with the athletic apparel, and I made lots of, like, you know, little crop tops and shorts and all kinds of things to sort of mix in. There were also two artists in Brooklyn, Zenobia Bailey. She made all of the colorful knit hats that you see Samuel Jackson wearing, as we love, and you see Teresa Marcellus there and behind the officer, she's wearing one. And also Nasha, she custom painted Radio Raheem's Bed-Stuy, Do or Die t-shirt for me. So I wanted to bring the artistry and the culture together on this block. It was a bit surreal, because if you look further down the block from where we were shooting, you could see the real Bed-Stuy, and there was another story. But our story was kind of a concentration of what Brooklyn and the summer in New York and the 80s and hip hop and all of that meant for that block.
You said something really interesting in relation to Do the Right Thing, and I love the term that you used. You talked about how also you were telling the story of a protest as well, and you said you called it garment protest, garment protest. I love that so much, and I really need you to talk about what that means, because I think thinking about the political implications of this particular art is fascinating. What does that mean when you're doing something like Do the Right Thing, which has some very real implications, right, of police brutality? There's there's real story thematics in there. What does that mean, garment of protest?
Yeah, garments of protest. Well, when you think about, okay, bugging out, he wears his kente shorts, he has his kente on when he comes to the neighborhood. When you think about, you know, the Nation of Islam, they wear their bow ties and their suits. They're presenting themselves. You know, when you think about Trayvon Martin and the hoodie, all of these things mean, you know, something as far as the mindset of the wearer. And I feel like the garments of protest that are displayed in my work are, you know, approached from the same perspective of, you know, a person who wears a t-shirt that says, you know, BLM. You know, you're saying to the world, this is who I am. This is what I represent. This is what I'm trying to convey to the world. And you see a zoot suit there. The zoot suit was considered what they called it in the press, a hoodlum fashion. But, you know, I like to say the big bellowy pants were kind of like what young men wear when they sag their pants. You know, it's radical fashion, it's individual, it's like saying that, you know, this is who I am and I'm unapologetic about it. So you know, I love to find those gems, those items that really project the voice of the times, the voice of the community, the voice of the youth, and the voice of moving forward. So
have you, I love that. Have you been watching, and I imagine you have because your eye goes there. Have you been watching then the fashion, what people are wearing as they are protesting in the streets, and what have you been thinking about that? Because Ruth Carter is I'm almost sure going to have a film.
Oh, wow, that would be such
like
an
this
honor.
period. And man, I'd love to know what that would look like. But what is outstanding to you about now, about protest, and what the story, you know, that fashion is telling, that people are consciously wearing?
Yeah, people are wearing their protests for sure. And I notice a lot of people wear black, but also a lot of people wear t-shirts that have, you know, something to say on them. Also, you know, it's just ironic that this all happened during the pandemic and we are wearing these masks over our faces and we're saying, I can't breathe. And so I feel like it all culminates to this incredibly powerful message. And, you know, the graphics combined with all of the different people, white, black, and, you know, throughout the world is also a part of this movement. You know, it's different from, I think, many movements where the majority might have been African American. This movement is everybody, and that colors it so rich. So
it's so interesting too that isn't it combining, it's new, that it's innovative, and yet at the same time I see historical, you know, also remnants. I see people with I am a man on it with a twist. There's something that they brought in that was not on the shirt in 1967, but that's also interesting to me, that you're seeing this sort of a new aesthetic merged with, you know, some of the, or innovating on some past ones that were part of the protest in the 60s. Because I saw Anthony Mackie even wearing, they have, I am a man, but vote underneath it.
Yeah. I mean, just all of the messages that are coming out of this are incredible. I mean, when we did Selma and the marchers were coming across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, you know, they were wearing trench coats and they had, you know, rolled up sleeping bags and backpacks because they were going to be marching all the way to Montgomery. You know, the Montgomery boycott, bus boycott, you know, it lasted almost a year. It was a longer protest. So, you know, you had people who were carpooling, going to work, you know, it was very different. Here you see many of the teachers that marched, and the people who marched with Martin Luther King, you know, this was a religious march at the same time. And so, you know, they were also, like, in some ways like the FOI, you know, they were putting their best foot forward. They were showing their nonviolence. by putting their hands in the pockets of their trench coats many times when they marched. So, you know, it's very different today. It's very different today. You wouldn't see these kind of garments of protest today. You would see, you know, athletic apparel, shorts and T-shirts and signs, homemade signs. A
Wow.
little
And
bit
in
more
that
like
sense,
the March on Washington.
sure. And in that sense, every piece project is a period piece in a sense, if it is locating people within a particular cultural period. So we think of period pieces as, you know, we mean, you know, past periods where there's very defined, but there's also in the contemporary moment when you're making a film, you're thinking about how that is telling the story of where we are right now.
Yes, for sure. And it's very important to look around the crowds and find those nuances that make it of the time. So we will be able to identify this time as well. Maybe there'll be in 10 years another Ruth Carter who will come out and they'll do a film, you know, about the 2020 protests.
So since you brought that up, I imagine that a lot of young costume designers, aspiring costume designers of color, young Black women in particular, you know, come to you or reach out to you. How is that a part of the work where you are now in terms of really wanting to mentor, especially since you came up in this industry still at a time in a field that is so not dominated by Black women or Black people in a way. And so is that a very important sort of mission or part of the work that you now really concentrate on?
Oh yeah, that's always been a part of the work. At 40 Acres, when I first started, we had internship programs. We always brought in interns. So that's how I started myself as an intern. And it was very hard for me to find, when I started out, any kind of mentorship. So as I became a designer, that's, you know, it's just something that is automatic for me because I know that there aren't very many avenues and that we all have to, you know, bring each other, you know, into the fold. I think today, you know, what I've been doing this 35 years and now finally the studios and I know the Academy has started to recognize that, you know, there is less inclusion than there should be and that they need to start mandating that productions have a diverse crew behind the scenes and recognize those films that are inclusive, those stories that, you know, do have a range of ethnicities in their stories because that's real life. So this is something that I've done for every film that I've been on because I think that I want my crew to be a reflection of me. And I believe that if we are shown how to do something, if anyone is shown the way that they can flourish at this as well. I was very fortunate to get directors who hired me a lot so I could practice and get to know this arena, but definitely those times are different now. And, you know, I need all kinds of support, not only to train young minds, young African-American minds to be designers, but also to be supervisors and costumers and ager dyers and jewelry makers. We need everything. So,
You know, it's impossible to fit the career of Ruth Carter on the slide. I would have had to start about a month ago because
basketball and BAPS.
just bringing this some of this back to us because I wanted to allow you a chance to just share. You shared a couple of pearls about working with Eddie Murphy. Like that was just a great story with you guys reflecting back to fashions that you knew as a child, and you gave us a little insight to talk about you know, with Spike Lee. But you've done projects like BAPS,
Yeah.
where there's a lot of playfulness and plastic
Oh,
suits
yeah.
and
Good
right. And I
gracious.
don't know how you came up with, you know, right, even this head.
Me neither. Oh my goodness. Well, the hair is Kim Kimball. And she had a salon in South Central at the time, and she was winning all of these hair shows. And so she was always coming up with something. I think she had one of those that she'd won that was similar to the Bow Wow, where she had like a propeller inside of it. And so, yeah, she was the brilliance behind them hairstyles. And I just followed suit. But
That,
Hallie's plastic jumpsuit there's a scene in Baps where she discovers the bidet and it's just squirting water all over the place. And I thought, she's got to be slipping and sliding all over because of her clothes. So that was kind of like the motivation to give her that rubber suit.
when I was looking at this awesome filmography, and I thought I basically knew all the films of Ruth Carter, and then I was going, she did that too. She did that too.
Yeah, I was unstoppable.
So do you think, and what also struck me, and I kind of want to really kind of construct this in the right way. Someone said to me something akin to sort of what sort of white films or white directed, it was something that akin to that sort of like, right? And I thought to myself, so it's funny how we don't characterize, quote, right, films with white actors and white directors as white films, right? But we do that with, don't we? With black film.
Mm-hmm.
But it made me think about how you have been such an important part, though, of it is true, the filmography of, I'm sorry, of film by Black directors, with starring Black cast. It's almost as if it wouldn't exist without Ruth Carter's name in it. I mean, one of your recent projects is the Coming to America sequel project. So
Yeah.
you're just, did that make it easier, though, coming into obviously an industry that was not friendly to giving Black women an opportunity, no matter how much of an amazing artist there were? The doors were not like wide open. I guess what we're looking for is a super sharp Black woman costume designer. In fact, they just didn't think in terms of,
well,
right?
Let's say I have done white projects too. They just don't get the kind of limelight, I guess, as the Black projects. And I did the pilot for Seinfeld, and I did Keeping Up with the Joneses. I've done some. But I think, as far as me dealing with the Hollywood industry and the Hollywood machine, especially in the time that I came in, I was working as a costume designer, and I was bouncing back and forth between New York and LA, but I was predominantly working with independent Black filmmakers at the time. So I didn't get really recognized in Hollywood, I feel. Maybe somebody recognized me, but they didn't tell me until I was nominated. So, you just think about that for a second, that it took an Oscar nomination to get recognized in Hollywood. That's a high bar.
Some 60 something, almost 70 films.
Yeah, and at that time I'd only done 5. It was Malcolm X that gave me the first nomination, and nobody should have to go to that extent to actually be recognized in Hollywood as a costume designer. You know what I'm saying? I should be actually, able to go into the room on any film. But I think it wasn't until Malcolm X was nominated did I start getting interview requests from other directors that were non-Black. So, but it happened for me pretty quickly. I mean, I was lucky to be connected with Spike Lee, and I was blessed to get to do Malcolm X, the story of Malcolm X, and so things were rigorous in my career very early and very quickly.
Yeah, and I think, and I don't want to, and for me, that's not the only drawback is that somebody as fabulously talented and productive as you were, the mainstream took so long to recognize, not that you were doing work with so many extraordinary Black independent and other filmmakers, because I think too that your evolution, and you've spoken about that, evolving as an artist, I think it looks like you had the freedom to do that, to very much evolve.
I think people just kind of discounted costume design and its influence in film in the early days. And when I did I'ma Get You Sucker, and I did my own illustrations back then, and we did the goldfish shoes, you know, it sort of started to, you know, dawn on people that, you know, costumes is pretty cool, you know, it's pretty important, but still at the end of every show, it was like, well, what do we do with this stuff, you know? And now they display it at the ArcLight. You see it, you know, you see the costumes from different films on display at the theaters. So, but back then it was nothing like that, you know, and it was even hard to get an interview, you know, before social media. You didn't really get to tell your story at the end of a film about, you know, what you did and how you made, you know, and I'ma Get You Sucker, there's the big hat ball where all the pimps come in and they got these giant hats, you know. Well, you know, me and two artisans, you know, we made all those hats in one of their homes. And, you know, there were so many great stories that were not told by many of the costume designers that were working so diligently to create the stories of these films.
Yeah.
And now we have a platform because I think social media has given us all our place in the sun.
Yeah, and I think we're talking more about how storytelling, the story isn't told without that important dimension in a film, right? That's
it's in every
so
frame.
important, right, to the visual story that you're telling. So it's and I also think that we had a conversation before this, and I said this is so awesome because people don't think about that as an art in the same way. It's very problematic because people, they kind of take that for granted, right? The costumes play people, and not thinking of that as this sort of really labor intensive, but also very innovative, imaginative, historical space, which it is. All of those things.
Look, I went to Egypt with Denzel Washington to, you know, create the Hajj that he went on later on in his life. And, you know, the incredible experiences, even behind the camera, of, you know, coming together in Egypt and a Muslim country, and you doing and learning so much. It's an incredible field, and it's full of incredible experiences.
Someone mentioned in the chat, and I'm so glad they did, to watch the, you know, they suggested watching the documentary, The Art of Design. And
abstract.
yeah, you know, to do that. But I think there's going to be a lot more attention to your work and behind the scenes, because the stories, I'm really fascinated by the stories of your creative process, but also your behind the scenes working with people. There's that, I don't even have time to get into it, but I love the hair curler story, for example, with Selma, and how you and Oprah, you know, with the director, with Lee, were sort of like, okay, you know, there's this moment where Oprah's character is, you know, she's going to the bus or something, and the director's like, you know, Lee's like, she's going to be in curlers, and you guys are like,
Lee Daniels wanted Oprah to have curlers in her hair when she brought her son to the bus station, which is a cool idea, it's a good idea, but because she was the butler's wife, and they were considered, you know, upper middle class, and they were pillars in their community. And, you know, just because she was that woman, she would never have left, you know, to see her son off to college at the bus station with curlers in her hair. So, you know, we agonized over that, and Oprah really tried to get Lee to see her point of view, but, you know, Lee loves that shock value. He loves that realness, that rawness, and it was also a good idea, you know. But then she was unable to convince Lee of it. And then one day I called Lee and I had a conversation, and he was like, okay. And then I texted Oprah, and she called me right away and said, how did you do that? So, you know, we're always talking about character in this journey that we're on. I mean, it's
so
an
in case y'all
incredible.
didn't know, y'all heard that, right? Oprah couldn't get it done. But the badass, and I'm saying it, with the 2 double A's and the triple
Yeah,
S,
well,
the
it
badass Ruth
just depends on whose story is more convincing at the time, and mine happened to be.
but that speaks to the trust I think that people have in you, trusting you, just your leadership in that, because you were, you, as you said, it was a good point that he was making, but you understood the social dynamics of a woman, a Black woman who
Yeah.
would have very much wanted to present a respectable presentation at a
Well,
moment like that.
when you think about, well, my aunt was that, in her community, and, she very much, it's a kind of an old school Southern, way of thinking.
So I know I have to wrap this up. So just going to wrap it up with 2 things. One is that someone's asked about what kind of advice would you give a young, designer who is really wanting to kind of chart their path, but follow the journey, sort of that you've had through film.
Yeah, you've got to remain a student of your passion. And you've got to want to do this more than anything else. And when you think of yourself as a costume designer, you're not thinking of yourself as a costume designer for film. You're thinking of yourself as a costume designer. So if someone wants you to do a dance performance, a theatrical performance, a film, anything, you are excited about it. You are ready to go at it. You're a student of your passion. And so if you try to narrow your view about what this is, then you're going to narrow your opportunities to learn. So you do have to stay open. And if you've already done those kinds of things and you are trying to get more film experience, you really do need to know, what films are coming in town. Sometimes they're independent films. They're smaller films that have to get permissions from the film commission of your city to shoot there. So it may be a good idea to connect with, the film commission in your city and see who's applied, if they'll give you any information about what films are coming up. Also, I would, and I did this, I studied the costumes of the films that I really admired. It's just like an artist who is a painter. He's going to look at the painters that he admires and kind of emulate them. It's okay to, to emulate someone that you admire, and then find out who that costume designer is and connect with them and ask them questions, DM them, find them. It's easier today to find costume designers online than it was when I was coming up. When I was coming up, I had to write letters to people. Sometimes they never wrote me back. But, I did study. I did study them. Anne Roth was one of them. I really loved her color palette and how controlled it was. And I tried to do that with my films. But so don't be afraid to just, try something, get out there. A lot of times it's with independent filmmakers, it's student films. If you can get on a student film, I went to USC and I got on a student film. And it was Saturdays, if you're just starting out, it's a good way to be on a set. You're on the same kind of set that, a big film is on. And you get to network with people, and those graduates move on to work in the industry. So you have to start developing and thinking, about how you're going to develop your network of people that, that will call you when they want costumes.
Wow, I love that. And last thing, you take us out of here with if you would please indulge us with finishing this statement. So when people look at your filmography and whatever you do in the future, what is the one thing perhaps you hope that it says about who Ruth Carter is as a professional and as an artist?
I hope that people will look at my films and say that she was an artist who cared about her history and who was passionate about her work.
Wow. Thank you, the fabulous Miss Ruth Carter, and all who tuned in. Thank you so much, African Diaspora Art Museum of Atlanta. This has been such an honor. We're going to be rewatching films. Thank you for your contributions so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in.
Thank you. Thanks all.